Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, bringing you a spotlight for the servant who has mastered the ancient art of reverse lolification, Wu Zetian Caster. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers on how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. And if you'd like to join us here live for servant spotlights and voice your opinion just like chat over here, say hi to YouTube chat. Then be sure to follow us over on Twitch or join us on the Discord, both of which are linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, you can also give this video a like because it really helps out the channel. And guys, thank you so much for the feedback you guys have been giving me on these spotlights, these live spotlights. Really appreciate that. I'm incorporating some of your suggestions into these spotlights to make them a bit more structured and easier to watch. So if you guys have more tips and things you want me to work on here, feel free to leave those in the comments respectfully, and I'll review them and we'll just work together to make these spotlights even better. So appreciate all of you guys for doing that. But now, on to Wu's stats. So, Wu has a max HP of 10,914. My Wu is well fed with foes. And the max attack of 9,492. She does have really high attack for a caster, which isn't saying much, but she does have low HP, which is saying much because casters usually have really high HP pools. She has a star generating rate of 10.7% and an NP generating rate of 0.61%. For her deck, she has a quick Arts Buster deck, with 5 hits on her quick, 3 hits on her arts, 2 hits on her buster, and 5 hits on her extra card. She does have good NP gain and star generating, mostly due to that double arts deck and a good NP gain rate, as well as the really high hit counts on her quick card. So she does have good internal stats there, but she has a really odd offensive stat spread for a caster, and she is a purely defensive servant for the most part, so there is a bit of a clash there. But let's talk about her skills. Her first skill is Charisma of the Inner Palace Summer, rank EX. This skill increases the party's attack for 3 turns by between 10 and 15%. So it is a charisma skill. It also increases the party's buster card effectiveness for 3 turns between 10 and 15%, and it increases the NP gain rate of the party for 3 turns between 10 and 20%, all of those effects depending on level. Her second skill is the Wu's Morning Lady, rank A, which reduces all enemies' NP gauge by 1, so it's an NP drain. It also increases the party's damage against undead enemies for 3 turns, between 20 and 30%, and it charges the party's NP gauge between 10 and 20%. All of those effects, of course, depending on level. And then her last skill is Empress Tau Arts, rank EX, which is an AoE stun that stuns all undead enemies for 1 turn, recovers the party's HP between 1,000 and 3,000 depending on level, and it removes all of the debuffs from the party. So, very defensive and buff-based skill set there. Her passives are Territory Creation rank A, which increases her arts effectiveness by 10%, Item Construction rank A, which increases her debuff success rate by 10%, and her last passive is Ambition for Imperial Ascension rank EX, which grants her mental debuff immunity, so she's immune to things like charm and terror, which comes in handy every so often. As far as her pen skills go, she has the normal mana loading and extra card damage, and she has a special anti-foreigner pen skill as well. That lets her do 30% additional damage against foreigner enemies. Moving on to her Noble Phantasm. Oh boy, I need to take a drink for this one. Her Noble Phantasm is Lai Lai Ku Li Jing Shi Men, which is an AoE Buster attack that has a damage modifier of between 300 and 500%, depending on level. It also inflicts undead on all enemies for 3 turns, and it does that before damage. It also deals an additional 150% bonus damage against enemies with the Man attribute, and it reduces their defense by 20% for 3 turns. It also has the bonus effect of increasing her NP damage for a turn between 10 and 30%, depending on overcharge. And finally, moving on to her Ascension mat requirements, Wu does need 6 Ghost Lanterns, 8 Shells, and 12 Magatamas for Ascension, as well as 10 Tranquil Bells. While for her skill leveling, she's going to need 12 Shells, 12 Ghost Lanterns, 20 Homunculus Babies, and 20 Ancient Bells per skill. So not bad. Mostly just silver mat requirements, no gold or bronze mat requirements there. So not too bad to level up. Right. Yeah, she kills a lot of babies, unfortunately. Those poor homunculi babies. So, let's talk about Wu's main role in the team, and that's going to be as a Buster support. She has a very strong charisma effect that it's only 15% attack buff, but it's a 15% Buster buff as well, so that actually equates out to like a 32% buff to Buster cards, which makes her a very good Buster buffing candidate. She also has the anti-undead buff for the whole party, which she can inflict herself. So her NP can inflict undead, and then she can give the party bonus damage against undead enemies. And she can also shred defense with her NP. So all in all, if you add all those buffs up, she can actually give the whole party over 90% bonus damage to Buster cards, assuming all of her debuffs land, which is really fucking good for a 4-star support. She also provides a good battery, NP battery for the team, 20%, none to scoff at, and she gives the team NP up. So she can actually be a really good NP battery for the squad. And she also has some good challenge quest viability because she provides the party with a universal AoE stun. Remember, she can inflict undead on all enemies, so her stun activates based on enemies being undead, which she can apply. It's an AoE stun almost all the time. She also has a party-wide heal, that's pretty decent, and a party-wide debuff removal, as well as NP drain, and AoE NP drain. So very good challenge quest utility there. She's kind of like the Swiss Army knife of utility. She kind of provides everything you want in a support. Really good damage buffs, like I said, over 90% buffing for Buster cards. Really good stall mechanics there with her NP drain and her stun. And then she has really, really strong defensive utility because of the healing and the cleanse. So she can pretty much wear any hat on the team and do really well. And because her buffs are all party-wide and all of her debuffs are AoE, you don't really have to pick and choose who you want to buff. Everyone just gets buffed. So she has the ability to affect the entire field every time she uses her skill or her NP, which is a luxury to have. And her buffs even work on herself since they're AoE, so she benefits herself as a Buster servant. Remember, she does have an AoE Buster NP, as well as a Buster deck, or semi-Buster deck, so she benefits a lot from her own buffs, which gives her some decent damage, despite being a caster. As far as her skill order goes, though, definitely NP charge first, as always. Then you're going to want to buff her charisma, and then her stun last. The only pen skill that's really worth taking on her is mana loading. She doesn't really need the other two. And then her NP is surprisingly strong. Not damage-wise. Unless you're fighting against a man attribute enemy, it's not going to do too much damage. But the fact that it can inflict undead gives her a lot of niche utility on different teams. There's actually a lot of servants that benefit from fighting undead enemies aside from herself. So that's a really good piece of utility to have. The defense down on her NP is really strong. Doesn't activate before damage, which kind of sucks, but really strong to have. Just an extra bit of DPS for the team. And it's pretty spammable. She has good NP gain. She has an NP battery built into her skill set. If you pair her with someone like Waver or Rhaenys or Merlin, she will be doing her NP a lot. Easily able to maintain the undead status on all enemies for the whole fight. It's not that difficult to do. So she can just perpetually make enemies undead. The one thing that is interesting that I actually found out while researching Wu for the spotlight is she fills a surprisingly niche role, like, or I should say a surprisingly empty niche. Like, there aren't really that many SR Buster supports, surprisingly enough. I always thought there were way more than there are, but a lot of the Buster supports are either SSRs like Fitch, Oberon, Merlin, etc., Nightingale, or they're bronze servants like Shakespeare, Chengong, etc. There aren't really that many 4-star Buster supports. There are a couple, but she's pretty much the best of them by far, and there's not really any competition in her role. So really nice niche to have because there's a lot of Buster servants in the game. And she works really well as a secondary support. She provides a phenomenal range of utility to just complement Buster teams really well, no matter what situation they're in. So, for example, if you have Vitch as your main support for Busters, then Wu can really work well with her because she can provide all of the stalling and the healing for challenge quests, while Vitch provides all of the big damage buffs and NP charge. But if you have a more like utility-based support like Waver or Rhaenys, then Wu can actually do a great job of providing the extra damage buffing while they provide the, stalling. And then of course if you have Merlin, they just work perfectly well together. They'll just buff your DPS up to sky high levels. She can basically fill any support role on the team, is what I'm trying to say. And even though her damage isn't like amazing, it's still pretty good, especially for a caster. So she can still contribute meaningfully in team fights as like a sub DPS, which is just pretty nice to have. Now, she does have the issue where a lot of her utility depends on debuffs. So if an enemy is debuff immune, similar to Summer Ares, her utility kind of falls off a cliff. It nosedives. But that's not as common as as it used to be. Her other major issue is that she doesn't really provide any crit support, like no star generating skills and no crit damage skills. And there's a lot of Buster servants who need crit damage and crit stars, so she kind of misses on that. But that's easily fixable with like CEs, so not too bad. As far as your team comp with her goes, any support works. Any Buster support or general support works well with her. Waver, Rhaenys, Merlin, Vitch, all good primary supports to pair with her. Wu's more of like a secondary support that you put on the team to round it out rather than a primary support. She also works really well with Saber Ibuki, not Summer Ibuki, Saber Ibuki. Because Saber Ibuki actually has a buff against undead enemies. It's like a mana burst. It's a 50% damage buff for 3 turns. And also Summer Martha has a huge damage buff against undead enemies. 100% damage buff. So really good with Saber Ibuki and Summer Martha. Also really good with Santa Martha, because Santa Martha has a skill that buffs the party's damage against undead enemies by 50% for 3 turns. So her and Santa Martha actually make for a really strong support duo if you have a more budget team. Can work really, really well. Yeah, Santa Martha OP. There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of servants that synergize well with anti-undead. Amakusa's another one of them. Her Bond CE gives an extra 15% damage against undead enemies for the party and a 10% buff to NP gain. I believe it's 10%. Let me just make sure. Yeah, 15% against undead and 10% NP gain to the party. That's actually worth using. 15%, considering she's a support, she doesn't really need the damage stats. And 15% for the party against undead enemies, which all enemies are going to be undead because Wu can keep that stacked on forever. Very strong. Very good, powerful synergy there. So I would recommend using her Bond CE. She can also be used with any CE that like allows her to NP quickly or generates crit stars. So stuff like K-Scope, Aerial Drive, 2030. There's another CE coming out later this year called Commentator of Flowers. Also really good for her because it helps generate crit stars. So anything that generates crit stars or gives her starting NP charge, very good on her. As for her command codes, anything that generates crit stars is good. You can also give her a command code that gives her extra damage against undead enemies, like Flower of the Underworld. Pretty good. She's a very flexible servant. So overall, Ibuki is really surprisingly strong. Really, really good. She's a well-rounded, like kind of jack-of-all-trades support that can fill any role on the team and do it really well. There's surprisingly a lack of 4-star Buster support, so she fits in really well there. She complements all the meta supports really well, like Fitch and Oberon and Merlin. She also has a bit of damage on her side as well, so she can also provide decent damage to your DPS. In the background, she's not as weak as most supports are. And she has a bunch of really good buffs herself. So, very strong across the board. I do wish that she had more crit support would be better, but beggars can't be choosers. She'll probably get a interlude in the future anyway that gives her like, buff everyone's crit damage by 50%. All in all, she gets an A. Really, really strong semi-support there. I think she's one of the best semi-supports in the game, especially for Buster. She's just phenomenal. If you're a new player, I think you should pull for her. She's excellent. Even if you don't have like a primary support, if you're newer, she can be your primary support too. She's very, very strong. If you don't have a Merlin or a Vitch, you can rely on her and build around her. Even if you just have like Lu Bu, you can pair Lu Bu with her and he'll go off. If you're free to play, she's still worth rolling for because her banner is stacked. Very similar to Ares. She's along on the same banner with Summer Scotty. So very good banner. Well worth rolling on and spending Saint Quartz on. Very good value. And like I said, there's not really many servants that fill her role. So she's unique in that sense. And even if you're an endgame player that's like doing challenge quests and stuff and looking for more niche servants, she still fills that role really well. Like I said, not many supports for Buster servants in the 4-star range. And she does have a lot of challenge quest utility because of the whole NP drain, AoE stun, debuff cleanse, all of that. Very good for challenge quests. I think regardless of who you are, you should consider rolling for Wu.